Dai-chan closed his laptop the moment the last slide of the resort presentation faded from the screen. He didn't linger on the numbers, didn't glance twice at projections his own architects had spent 6 months perfecting. He leaned down and kissed Jennifer softly on the forehead, lingering there a second longer than necessary, breathing her in, before his phone buzzed against the glass table and pulled him toward the shoreline to take an urgent call, leaving her 5 best friends behind in the private beach hut.
Tell them to send the seaplane to the
Smiling
north
to
dock,
herself,
not the main jetty.
Jennifer left the villa carrying a large wooden tray, lunch, fresh fruit, drinks for the people she loved most. As she approached the beach hut, laughter made her slow down. Hidden behind a line of palm trees, she heard the women mocking her, calling her too ordinary for a billionaire, and promising to take the man she loved. "She's not even that impressive. I don't get what he sees." Lillian's voice, sharp and quick, followed by Monica's low chuckle underneath it. Jennifer's foot found the sand and stayed there. "He picked her," Tasha said, and for a second Jennifer's chest loosened, thinking maybe this was the part where someone defended her, until Tasha kept going. "Which honestly just proves rich men don't know what they want. They pick whoever's nice to them first." "That's not fair," Lillian said, though her tone carried no real conviction behind it. "She's not stupid. She's just soft, always has been." "Soft doesn't keep a man like that," Nicole said. "Soft is what he'll get bored of eventually. Someone's going to have to be there when he does." And then Vanessa's voice. Quiet, the way it always was, the voice Jennifer had trusted since they were 11 years old sharing a bunk bed at summer camp, telling secrets under a flashlight. Except now that voice was saying something Jennifer had never heard it say before. "I'm not saying anything none of you are thinking. Look at her. Look at me. If I had 1 week, just one, with a man who looked at me the way he looks at her, I wouldn't waste it being grateful. I'd make sure he never looked at anyone else again." Nobody laughed at that. Nobody told her to stop. The tray in Jennifer's hands had gone very still, the ice in the pitcher no longer clinking, because she had gone very still, every muscle in her arms locked so tight she could feel it in her jaw. "You're actually serious," Monica said, but it wasn't a question. It was awe. "I've been serious since Seoul," Vanessa said. "You just weren't paying attention." Jennifer stepped back, one slow foot at a time, careful not to let the tray tip, careful not to let a single ice cube shift, and walked back toward the villa the way she'd come. The whole island looked different to her now, like someone had changed the lighting on a stage she'd been standing on her whole life without realizing it was a stage at all. She set the tray down on the kitchen counter. Her hands were steady. That surprised her more than anything else that had happened in the last 4 minutes. She stood there a long moment, staring at the tray she'd carried with so much love 20 minutes earlier, and thought about all the years leading up to this one. The sleepovers, the shared clothes, the group chat she'd never once left on red no matter how tired or busy she'd been. 15 years of choosing them, again and again, without ever once stopping to ask whether they were choosing her back in the same way. She thought about calling her own mother, then remembered there was no one left on the other end of that particular number anymore, and the thought landed with its own quiet ache on top of everything else. By the time the 5 of them wandered up from the beach hut 20 minutes later, sun-warmed and easy, Jennifer had already rearranged her face into the one she'd worn her entire life around them, soft, open, glad to see them. Lillian wrapped an arm around her shoulders and asked if lunch was ready. Jennifer said yes. Her voice didn't shake. She spent the rest of that afternoon on autopilot, refilling drinks, laughing at the right moments, reapplying sunscreen to Nicole's back when she asked, all while some separate part of her stood just outside her own body, watching the performance from a slight distance and taking careful notes. She excused herself before dinner under the pretense of changing, and instead sat on the edge of the bathtub in her room with the water running so no one would hear if her breathing broke, though it never quite did. She simply sat there, staring at nothing, running the sentence back through her mind on a loop. I'd make sure he never looked at anyone else again, until it stopped sounding like words and started sounding like a fact she was going to have to build the rest of her week around. Dai-chan noticed first that evening, the way he noticed everything, in the small margins other people missed. Jennifer laughed at dinner when the others laughed. She answered when spoken to. But there was a half-second delay now, like she was translating herself before she spoke instead of just speaking. He waited until the villa had gone quiet, until the 5 friends had scattered to their rooms with wine glasses and gossip, and he found Jennifer on the balcony, arms folded over the railing. "You've been somewhere else all night," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Just tired," she said, and even she could hear how thin it sounded. He reached over and laced his fingers through hers on the railing, and they stood there together listening to the water. "Whatever it is," he said quietly, "you don't have to carry it alone tonight." She almost told him. The words were right there, ready to spill. But some instinct told her that the moment she said it out loud, it would become real in a way she couldn't undo. So instead she leaned her head against his shoulder, and when he turned to face her fully, cupping her jaw and kissing her slow and unhurried, deep enough to make the ache in her chest go quiet for a while, she let herself stay there, wrapped in him, for as long as the night allowed. The days that followed took on a strange double life. Jennifer smiled in every photograph, linked arms with Lillian on the marina dock, let Tasha braid small shells into her hair. But underneath, she had started watching, really watching, the way you watch a stranger instead of someone you've known for 15 years. She noticed Nicole complimenting her outfits, and then, in the same breath, asking where she'd gotten the money for them. She noticed Monica always seemed to know exactly how much things cost: the villa, the yacht, the ring on Daichan's assistant's hand, and mentioned the numbers like she was keeping a ledger. She noticed Tasha's laugh had an edge to it now, coming out half a beat after everyone else's, like she had to remind herself to perform happiness instead of feeling it. Even Lillian, who Jennifer had always considered the least complicated of the 5, had started doing something small and strange, steering conversations away from Jennifer whenever Daichan was nearby, redirecting his attention toward Vanessa with an ease that felt too practiced to be accidental. Once, at breakfast, Lillian had asked Vanessa a question about her outfit specifically loud enough for Daichan to overhear, then glanced toward Jennifer afterward with an expression that might have been guilt, if Jennifer hadn't already stopped giving people the benefit of that particular doubt. And she noticed Vanessa, the friend Jennifer had told things to that she couldn't tell the others, now finding reasons to be wherever Daichan was, asking him questions about the resort that were a little too specific, standing just slightly too close during the group photo on the yacht, angling her body so that in the picture, it almost looked like she belonged in the space between them. One afternoon, drifting near the reef with a snorkel mask pushed up onto her forehead, Jennifer overheard Nicole and Tasha talking on the sun deck above her, their voices carrying down through the water in fragments. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would look if we'd met someone like him first?" Nicole was saying. "Every day of this trip," Tasha said. "I love Jennifer, I do, but watching this, it's hard not to think about what we settled for." "Nobody made you settle." "Didn't they, though? You get tired of being the friend who's happy for everyone else. At some point you start wondering when it's your turn." Jennifer let herself sink lower in the water, the voices fading into the general hush of the ocean, and surfaced somewhere else entirely, her chest tight with something that wasn't quite anger yet. It wasn't just Vanessa. It had never just been Vanessa. It had been all of them in their own quiet ways for longer than she wanted to think about. Jennifer said nothing. She smiled through dinners and toasted through champagne and let herself become, for the first time in her life, a woman who observed instead of trusted blindly. She spent those days fighting a version of herself she didn't recognize, one that wanted, in quiet, unguarded moments, to believe there was some explanation that made all of it survivable. Maybe Vanessa was going through something. Maybe the others were just drunk, just careless, just saying things they didn't mean the way people sometimes did after too much wine and too much sun. She caught herself building these excuses in the shower, in the 15 minutes before sleep, and she hated that part of herself a little, not because it was foolish, but because it revealed how much of her identity had been built around being the friend who forgave first, who made room for other people's worst days without ever asking whether they'd make room for hers. She found herself, one quiet afternoon, sitting on a stool in Isabella's kitchen while the older woman prepared that evening's dinner, the smell of garlic and citrus filling the room. "You've gone quiet this week," Isabella said, not looking up from the cutting board. "I notice these things. Been cooking for guests on this island long enough to know when someone's smile doesn't match their eyes." "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone paying attention." Isabella set down her knife and looked at her properly. "Whatever it is, you don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting yourself, not even people you've loved a long time." Jennifer felt something in her chest ease slightly, hearing it from someone outside the tangle of it all, someone who had no stake in any of it, no history to defend. "How do you know when it's time to stop protecting people who have stopped protecting you?" Isabella considered the question the way she considered a dish that wasn't quite finished. "You'll know," she said simply. "The knowing usually arrives before you're ready for it. That doesn't make it wrong." There was a moment, 2 days later, when Jennifer almost told Vanessa everything. They'd ended up alone on the veranda while the others napped off the afternoon heat. "You seem different this trip," Vanessa said, not looking up from a loose thread on her cover-up. "Lighter, maybe, or maybe just far away, I can't tell which." Jennifer studied her, really studied her, searching the familiar face for evidence she'd somehow missed her whole life. "I'm just tired," she said, echoing the same thin excuse she'd given Dai-chan. Vanessa smiled, and for one unbearable second, Jennifer almost reached across the space between the chairs and asked her outright. But then Vanessa's eyes drifted toward the water, toward the direction Dai-chan had walked 20 minutes earlier, and something in the length of that look told Jennifer everything she needed to know without a single word spoken. Jennifer let the silence stretch a moment longer, remembering, unwillingly, the version of Vanessa she'd carried in her memory for 15 years. The girl who'd shown up at her mother's funeral with a casserole and hadn't said a single word the entire afternoon, just sat beside her on the porch steps until the sun went down, because she'd understood, somehow, that Jennifer didn't need words that day. The girl who'd driven 6 hours through a snowstorm for her college graduation, because she refused to let Jennifer walk across that stage without someone in the crowd who actually knew what it had cost her to get there. That girl was still somewhere inside the woman sitting across from her now. Jennifer just didn't know anymore how much of her was left, or when exactly she'd started disappearing. She thought about all the versions of Vanessa she'd loved over the years. The anxious teenager who used to call at midnight, convinced her parents were getting divorced. The young woman who'd cried at Jennifer's design school graduation louder than anyone else in the room. The friend who'd once given up her own birthday plans without complaint because Jennifer needed someone that particular week. None of those memories were lies. That was the part that made this so much harder to hold. That love and betrayal could apparently occupy the exact same person, sometimes even the exact same year, without either one canceling the other out. If you've ever had a friend who wasn't really your friend, you already understand exactly what Jennifer was feeling on that island. And if this story is pulling you in the way it's pulling us in, go ahead and hit subscribe, because part 2 is going to answer every single question this story is about to raise. It was 3 nights later, on the covered deck of the yacht, that Vanessa made her move in front of everyone and no one at the same time. They had anchored just off a smaller island for a sunset dinner, string lights strung along the railing, Captain Daniel keeping the engine idling low enough that the only real sound was water against the hull. Dai-chan watched Jennifer across the table as she leaned in to hear something Lillian was saying, her whole face open in that way she had of listening like the other person's words genuinely mattered to her, and he found himself thinking, not for the first time that week, that whatever else this island exposed about the people around her, it had only made her own character more obvious by comparison. Everyone else on this trip was performing something. She simply wasn't. Dai-chan's phone lit up with Lucas's name, and he excused himself toward the stern for better signal. Vanessa waited exactly 4 minutes before rising with her own phone, murmuring something about needing signal too, and following him. Jennifer watched from her seat, half listening to Lillian talk about a designer sale, and saw the exact moment Vanessa leaned in and kissed him. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Dai-chan stepped back so fast his drink nearly went overboard, and even from 30 feet away, Jennifer could see the shock on his face turn into something colder, something controlled. Vanessa returned to the table a minute later, expression composed into something almost bored, and picked up her wine glass like nothing had happened. She didn't look at Jennifer. That, more than anything, told Jennifer she knew exactly what she'd done. Nobody else on the boat seemed to have noticed. Lillian was still deep in her story about a sample sale. Monica was photographing her own reflection in a wine glass. Nicole and Tasha argued amiably about a song playing from the sound system. For a strange, suspended moment, Jennifer felt like the only person on the entire yacht who understood that something had just permanently changed. Like watching an accident from across the street, while everyone around you kept walking, unaware, oblivious to the sound that had just torn through the evening. She sat perfectly still, her wine glass untouched in front of her, running the last 2 seconds back through her mind, until the shape of it stopped feeling like something she needed to make sense of and started feeling instead like the final piece of evidence she'd been quietly gathering all week without letting herself admit that was what she was doing. Dai-chan came back a few minutes later, sat beside Jennifer, and resumed the conversation with the group as if nothing had shifted, though his jaw stayed tight for the rest of dinner and his hand found hers under the table and didn't let go again. He told her everything that night, lying beside her in the dark. The kiss, what he'd said to Vanessa, how it had felt like being handed proof of something he hadn't wanted to believe. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with the same deliberate care he brought to everything that mattered to him, and Jennifer listened without interrupting, feeling something in her finally settle now that the secret wasn't hers alone to carry anymore. "I should have told you sooner," Jennifer whispered finally. "I heard them, that first day, behind the beach hut. I heard Vanessa say she'd take you from me if she had the chance." Dai-chan went very still beside her, not with anger, with something closer to recognition, like a lock clicking into place. "That's why you've been quiet," he said. "I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't." He pulled her into him then, her back against his chest, his arm wrapped over her like something built to stay. His mouth found the curve of her shoulder, her neck, unhurried, deliberate, like he was trying to put back together everything the last week had chipped away at her. "You don't have to do anything with it tonight," he murmured against her skin. "But I promise you this, I see all of it now, every one of them, and I'm not going to let this island turn into something that hurts you." She turned in his arms and kissed him like she meant to erase the last 6 days entirely, and for a long while afterward, in the dark of that room. The rest of the island simply didn't exist. Dai-chan woke before sunrise 2 mornings later and found the bed empty beside him, a note on the pillow, "Come find me." He followed her footprints down to the beach, where she sat alone watching the sky lighten. He dropped down behind her, pulling her back against his chest. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Neither could I. Can I tell you something strange? Part of me isn't even angry at her yet. It still just feels like grief. Like the version of my life I thought I was living died, and I'm the one who has to bury it." He pressed his lips to the crown of her head. "You're allowed to grieve it. You don't have to skip that step just because you're strong enough to survive it." "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "I don't," he admitted. "I just know you. That's different." He turned her gently so she was facing him, the early light catching the side of her face. "Can I tell you something too? I've been trying to figure out how to say this all week without it sounding like I'm trying to fix something with a grand gesture. But watching you hold yourself together for everyone else this whole trip, it's made me want to build a life with you where you never have to do that again. Not for me. Not for anyone." Jennifer felt her eyes sting, and this time it wasn't grief behind it. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Then I'll say it again tomorrow, and the day after that, until you believe it all the way through." They stayed until the sun cleared the horizon completely, the ocean turning the color of fire, and for those minutes, the island belonged only to the two of them. From that night forward, Dai-chan changed the way he moved through the group, subtle to everyone but Jennifer. Still warm, still gracious, but watchful now. He noticed when Nicole steered conversations toward his business holdings. He noticed when Monica angled her phone to capture herself near his watch, his car keys, anything with a price tag attached. He noticed Vanessa finding new, quieter ways to insert herself. He said nothing to any of them directly. Instead, one afternoon while Jennifer napped, he pulled Lucas aside. "Pull the island's security footage," he said quietly. "Every camera, every day since we landed. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Lucas didn't ask why. "Can I say something out of turn?" Lucas asked instead, closing the laptop he'd been holding. Dai-chan glanced up. "You usually do anyway." "I've worked for you 6 years. I've watched you walk away from women who wanted your name more than they wanted you. I've never once seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." Lucas hesitated. "Whatever this footage shows, don't let it make you doubt what you already know is true." Dai-chan didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the water, toward the beach hut he could just make out from this angle, and thought about the first afternoon on the island, Jennifer laughing at something Isabella had said, entirely unaware that anyone in her orbit wished her anything but well. "I don't doubt her," he said finally. "I doubt how much longer I can watch this happen to her before I do something about it." Lucas spent the next 2 days moving through the footage frame by frame, cross-referencing timestamps against the group's schedule, building a timeline nobody on the trip realized was being assembled around them. A conversation by the pool here. A whispered exchange on the marina dock there. Vanessa's hand lingering too long on Dai-chan's arm during a group toast, caught from 3 different angles by 3 different cameras. He flagged each moment, backed it up, and said nothing to anyone but the one person who needed to know. It was tedious, meticulous work, the kind most people would have handed off, but Lucas understood exactly what was at stake in getting it right the first time. By the second evening, he had enough. More than enough. What had started as a single overheard sentence in a beach hut had grown, frame by frame, into a pattern so consistent it could no longer be explained away as coincidence or wine-loosened gossip. It was a plan. A slow, patient, coordinated plan, and 5 women had each played their part in it without a single one of them stopping to ask whether Jennifer deserved better than what they were building behind her back. Vanessa, for her part, had convinced herself the kiss hadn't been a mistake. It had been a beginning. She replayed it constantly, editing the memory each time until his coldness afterward became, in her mind, a man protecting a secret rather than a man drawing a line. She began referring to Jennifer's life, in the privacy of her own thoughts, as something temporary, a placeholder she was waiting to outlast. "You don't think I'm being crazy," she said to Lillian one evening in the kitchen, under the pretense of refilling ice. "I think you're being honest," Lillian said. "Someone in this friend group has to be." "It's not about deserving," Vanessa said. "It's about who actually fits, and I fit better. I've always fit better, she just got there first." Vanessa's certainty, once it took hold, didn't feel like obsession to her. It felt like clarity. She started rehearsing conversations in her head at night, imagining a version of events where Dai-chan eventually admitted that Jennifer, kind as she was, had simply never matched him the way Vanessa believed she herself could. She cataloged small moments as proof, a distracted glance across a dinner table, a delayed response to a text, anything she could later point to and say, "See, I told you it was already ending." She wasn't lying to the others when she said she was serious. She was lying to herself first, and had been for longer than any of them realized. Late one night, unable to sleep, Vanessa scrolled back through old photos on her phone, years of them, birthdays and brunches and beach trips, Jennifer's face in nearly every frame, always at the center, always the one people gravitated toward without seeming to try. Vanessa had told herself for years that she didn't mind standing slightly outside that warmth. Looking at the photos now, she understood that she'd minded every single time, had simply gotten skilled at not letting it show. Somewhere in the last week, on this island, she'd stopped bothering to hide it even from herself. Monica leaned into her role too, capturing photo after photo designed less for memory, and more for a narrative she suspected they might all need later. A candid of Jennifer distracted on her phone, cropped to suggest distance instead of exhaustion. Tasha and Nicole mostly watched and waited, placing quiet bets on how the week would end. 15 years of friendship had curdled, without a single dramatic moment, into something closer to rivalry dressed up as loyalty. That night's dinner was the first time Jennifer tested the new version of watching she'd been practicing all week. You've asked Grace about the villa's upkeep costs like 4 times now, Jennifer said to Nicole, tone light, curious rather than accusing. Thinking about redecorating your place. Nicole's laugh came half a second too late. Just curious how the other half lives. Jennifer turned to Monica. You've taken a lot of pictures of Dai-chan's watch this week. It's a nice watch. Monica's smile flickered. I like documenting the trip. Sue me. I'm not suing anyone, Jennifer said easily, reaching for the bread basket like the conversation meant nothing at all. Just noticing things. I've gotten good at that lately. Across the table, Vanessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth before she recovered and asked Tasha something about the wine list. Dai-chan's hand found Jennifer's knee under the table and squeezed once. She wasn't ready to say everything yet, but she was done pretending she hadn't noticed anything at all. Rain came on the 6th night, sudden and heavy, turning a warm evening into something loud and close. The 5 friends retreated indoors to play cards and drink wine, and Jennifer excused herself early, saying she had a headache, though the truth was simpler. She was tired of performing. She found Dai-chan on the covered terrace, watching the storm move over the water. He turned when he heard the door, and whatever he saw in her face made him cross the space between them without a word. Whatever composure she'd been holding onto for 6 days finally gave out. She didn't sob dramatically. It was quieter than that, her shoulders just folded inward, the exhaustion of pretending finally catching up to her all at once. Dai-chan wrapped his arms around her, and she pressed her face into his shirt and let herself finally stop holding it together. I keep thinking about how long they must have felt this way, she said against his chest, voice cracking. Years, maybe, and I never noticed. What does that make me? It makes you someone who loved without keeping score. He said, hand moving slowly over her back. That was never your failure, Jennifer. That was theirs. I don't know how to look at them anymore. Then don't force yourself to yet. He tilted her chin up, thumb brushing a tear off her cheek. You've spent this whole trip holding everyone else's comfort above your own. Tonight, just for tonight, you don't have to hold anything. You know what the worst part is, she said, voice still thick. My mom used to tell me that the people who truly love you make room for you without being asked. I used to think that meant I just had to keep making room for everyone else, and eventually they'd do the same for me. I don't think I ever stopped to ask if that was actually how it worked. It's not, Dai-chan said gently. Love that only flows one direction isn't love. It's just a job you never agreed to take. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm underneath, and let herself hold onto the simple fact of it, that some things, at least, weren't performances. That this, whatever it cost her to admit after everything else this week had taken from her, was real. She let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in her chest for a week. He kissed her softly at first, and then not softly at all, the kind of kiss that said everything he hadn't found the words for yet. She kissed him back with her hands fisted in the front of his shirt, the storm rattling the shutters around them, and for the first time since the beach hut, she let herself feel something that wasn't grief. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the air washed clean and the beach glittering with debris the tide hadn't yet reclaimed. Dai-chan arranged something that evening without telling any of the others. A small table set alone on the sand, a half-mile down the shore from the villa, far enough that the lights of the main house shrank to a soft glow behind them, close enough to the water that the tide occasionally reached for the table legs and retreated. You planned this today? Jennifer asked, taking in the single candle, the 2 place settings, the small speaker Grace had clearly helped him rig to a nearby palm. I planned it 3 days ago, he admitted. I just hadn't found the right night until now. They ate slowly, without an audience for the first time in a week, and when a song came on that neither of them recognized but both of them liked anyway, Dai-chan stood and held out his hand. I don't really dance, Jennifer said. Neither do I. We'll be bad at it together. They were bad at it together, barefoot in the wet sand, her laughter carrying out over the water when he spun her too fast and nearly sent them both stumbling. But somewhere in the middle of being bad at it, the missteps stopped mattering, and they moved slower, closer, her forehead against his jaw, His hand splayed flat against the small of her back like he was trying to memorize the shape of her through his palm. The candle on the table had burned low by then, throwing a small, unsteady light across the sand, and the moon had come up bright enough behind them that neither of them needed anything more than that to see by. Dai-chan's hand moved slowly up her spine, and she felt herself lean fully into him, the last of the week's tension finally loosening from her shoulders, replaced by something warmer, something she hadn't let herself feel in days. "I keep waiting for you to get tired of all of this," she admitted quietly, swaying with him. "The drama, the friends, the mess I brought onto your island." "You didn't bring any of it," he said against her hair. "They did, and I'm not going anywhere, Jennifer. Not because of them, not because of anything short of you telling me to." She lifted her head and kissed him then, unhurried, his hands sliding up into her hair, hers pressed flat against his chest like she could feel his heartbeat through her palms. And for a long while after the song ended, neither of them moved to turn the music back on. The morning after the storm, Vanessa made one final attempt. She found Dai-chan alone on the lower deck and sat down across from him, uninvited, her knee nearly brushing his. "Can I say something you might not want to hear?" she asked. "You can say whatever you'd like. I think there's something between us that neither of us has been honest about. I think Jennifer is a wonderful person, genuinely, but I don't think she's who you actually need. I think you know that too." Dai-chan set his tablet down and looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before, entirely closed. "I think you should be very careful about what you say next, because I'm only going to give you the chance to walk it back once. I'm only being honest." "Then let me be honest too." He stood, buttoning his jacket, his voice level and quiet in the way that unsettled people far more than shouting would have. "I know exactly who I need. I've known since the day I met her. Nothing that happens on this island is going to change that, and if you were half the friend to her that you claim to be, you'd already know it too." He left her sitting alone on the deck, the tablet still glowing faintly beside her, and Vanessa stayed there a long time afterward, telling herself it hadn't gone the way it sounded, that his anger only proved how close she'd gotten to something true. She found Lillian by the pool an hour later, still rattled, and recounted the conversation in a version that softened every hard edge, framing his rejection as hesitation, his warning as fear of his own feelings. "Maybe you should just give him space," Lillian said carefully, watching Vanessa's face for the reaction she was clearly bracing for. "Maybe this isn't going the way you think it is." "You don't understand what it's like," Vanessa snapped, sharper than she meant to. "None of you do. You all get to go home to your regular lives and forget this island ever happened. I have to go back to mine knowing exactly what I could have had and didn't take." Lillian didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't have made things worse, and for the first time all week, she found herself wondering whether she'd made a mistake helping this go as far as it had. That afternoon, while the others took the smaller boat out for snorkeling, Jennifer and Dai-chan stayed behind and tried, badly, to recreate a dish Isabella had made the first night. "You're supposed to fold it in," Jennifer said, laughing as he dumped an entire cup of coconut milk in at once. "Not baptize the pan." "I'm an entrepreneur, not a chef. I hire people for this." "Today you don't have that luxury." Isabella found them like that 20 minutes later, flour dusted across the counter, Dai-chan attempting to salvage a sauce that was, by any professional standard, unsalvageable. She stood in the doorway a moment, unnoticed, watching the two of them argue cheerfully over a recipe neither of them had any business attempting, and felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't expected to feel about guests she'd known less than a week. She mentioned it to Grace later that evening while they cleared the last of the dinner service. "In all my years on this island, I've never seen him like this with anyone." "The other one?" Grace asked, meaning Vanessa, though she didn't say the name. "That one wants to be looked at," Isabella said, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. "This one," she nodded toward the direction Jennifer and Dai-chan had gone, laughing hand in hand, toward the beach. "This one, he simply looks. There's a difference and it matters more than people think." They ate the result sitting, cross-legged, on the kitchen floor. and Jennifer realized she'd laughed more in that hour than in the entire 6 days combined. "This is what I want," she said quietly. "Not the island, not any of this, just this." Dai-chan tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering against her cheek, and kissed her slowly, unhurried, like they had nowhere else in the world to be. "Then that's what you'll have," he said against her mouth. "For the rest of it, if you'll let me." She didn't fully understand, in that moment, what he meant by the rest of it. She would understand soon enough. They stayed on the kitchen floor long after the food had gone cold, her head resting against his shoulder, his fingers absently tracing patterns against her arm. "Tell me what you actually want," she said. "Not the version you give investors, the real one." He was quiet for a moment, like he was deciding how much to say. "A house that doesn't feel like a hotel. Somewhere with a kitchen someone actually cooks in badly, like today. A life that isn't measured entirely in square footage and quarterly earnings." He glanced down at her. "You, in most of the rooms of it." That's a very specific answer for someone who usually deflects with a joke. "You make it hard to deflect." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "What about you? What do you actually want, once we're off this island and away from all of it?" Jennifer thought about it honestly, turning the question over instead of rushing to fill the silence. "I want to design spaces again without wondering if I only got the client because of who I'm dating. I want my friendships to feel like something I chose freely, not something I'm still choosing out of habit. And I want whatever this is between us to survive contact with real life, not just island magic." "It will," he said, with a certainty that made her want to believe him completely. "I promise you that." 2 days later, Dai-chan flew alone to the mainland under the excuse of a supplier meeting and returned before sunset with a small velvet box tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. He'd chosen the ring the way he chose everything that mattered, quietly, decisively. She'd once told him, half-joking, that the ugliest thing about wealth was how loud it insisted on being about itself. What he'd found instead was simple, deliberate, a single stone set low against the band. Built to last, rather than to impress a room. On the flight back, he found himself thinking about his own parents. His father, who had built an empire out of nothing and lost his marriage doing it, too consumed by growth and leverage and expansion to notice the exact moment his wife stopped waiting up for him. Dai-chan had promised himself young that he'd never let ambition cost him the one thing that was supposed to make all of it worth having. Looking at the ring box on the seat beside him, he understood, more clearly than he ever had, exactly what that promise was going to require of him going forward. The jeweler had asked if he wanted anything engraved inside. Dai-chan gave him 3 words in Korean and didn't translate them, and the man didn't ask him to. He hid the box in the villa's private safe and told himself he'd find the right night. Not yet. Not while the island was still full of women pretending to love the woman he intended to marry. On the final evening, staff began preparing the beach for a farewell dinner, string lights threaded through the palms, long tables set with white linen, candles waiting for the sun to drop low enough. Jennifer spent the afternoon arranging flowers, humming that same formless tune from 6 days earlier, because despite everything, she still believed in ending the trip with grace. It wasn't naivety anymore. It was a decision. A quiet refusal to let this island turn her bitter before she'd even chosen what to do with what she knew. She thought more than once that afternoon about the woman who had walked toward the beach hut 6 days ago with a lunch tray and a hum in her throat, and wondered whether that woman would recognize the one standing here now, folding napkins into careful triangles, still smiling, but for entirely different reasons. Isabella caught her on the way down to the beach, pressing a small glass of something cold into her hand. "For your nerves," she said simply, though Jennifer hadn't said a word about having any. "Whatever happens tonight, you've carried yourself with more grace this week than most people manage in a lifetime. Don't forget that, whatever comes next." Jennifer squeezed her hand in thanks and continued down toward the sand, the glass cool against her palm, Isabella's words settling into her chest alongside everything else she was carrying tonight. Vanessa found her there an hour before the others arrived, helping arrange the last of the centerpieces without being asked, an unspoken peace offering neither of them said out loud. "It's been a good trip," Vanessa said carefully, testing the words. "Hasn't it?" Jennifer looked at her for a long moment. This woman she'd known longer than she'd known almost anyone alive, who had sat beside her on porch steps after a funeral and driven through a snowstorm for a graduation, who had also, somewhere along the way, started rehearsing a future that required Jennifer's absence from it. She thought about telling her everything right there, 6 days of silence finally breaking open in the golden light before dinner. "It's been a lot of things," Jennifer said instead, and left it exactly there, watching something flicker and then settle behind Vanessa's eyes. Not quite understanding, not quite suspicion, just the faint unease of a person who couldn't be certain how much the other one actually knew. "You'd tell me," Vanessa said, quieter now. "If something was wrong, wouldn't you?" Jennifer picked up the last of the flowers and set them gently into the centerpiece, taking her time with the answer. "I used to think I would tell you everything," she said. "I'm still figuring out what's true anymore." She walked away before Vanessa could ask what that meant, leaving her standing alone at the half-finished table with a question she didn't yet have the courage to ask directly. Jennifer retreated to the villa's edge for a few private minutes before the others arrived, watching the staff finish threading the last of the lights through the palms. She thought about the version of this trip she'd imagined months ago, back when Dai-chan had first shown her photographs of the island, and she'd pictured nothing but sunlight and laughter, and the 5 people she trusted most in the world standing beside her while it happened. That version hadn't survived contact with reality. But something else had grown in its place, quieter, harder one, and in its own strange way, more honest than anything she'd carried onto this island a week ago. She wasn't the same woman who'd walked toward the beach hut with a lunch tray and a hum in her throat. She wasn't sure yet whether that was a loss or the first real gain of her adult life. Maybe, she thought, it could be both grief and growth occupying the same week, the same body, without needing to cancel each other out any more than love and betrayal had in Vanessa. Dai-chan found a moment alone on the beach as the light turned gold, the ring box heavy in his pocket, his mind circling the question of timing. He walked the waterline slowly, letting the last warm inch of tide reach his bare feet and retreat, rehearsing in his head the dozen different ways he might ask her, discarding each one as either too small or too rehearsed for what he actually felt. He thought about the morning on this same stretch of sand, when she'd left him a note that said nothing but "come find me," and he thought that maybe the truest version of what he wanted to say to her wouldn't need to be more complicated than that either. Just an honest sentence, said plainly, without an audience. Lucas approached from the tree line, a tablet under his arm, his expression unreadable. "You need to see this," Lucas said and pressed play. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. The beach hut, 6 days earlier, 5 women gathered close, laughing. "If I had 1 week, just one, with a man who looked at me the way he looks at her, I wouldn't waste it being grateful. I'd make sure he never looked at anyone else again." Dai-chan's hand closed slowly around the ring box in his pocket. He thought about the 3 words engraved inside a band he'd chosen for a woman who deserved to hear a proposal untangled from betrayal, not delivered in its shadow. He thought about how close he'd come to letting this week end without ever knowing the full shape of what had been circling her the entire time. How easily, if Lucas hadn't been thorough, all of it might have stayed buried under sunlight and champagne, and the appearance of 6 old friends simply enjoying one last night together. "How long have you had this?" he asked. "Since yesterday morning," Lucas said. "I wanted to be certain of every angle before I brought it to you. Every word matched to a face, every timestamp cross-checked twice." Dai-chan looked up toward the villa, toward the string lights just beginning to glow, toward the woman who had spent the whole afternoon making sure this final dinner would be beautiful for 5 people who had spent the trip deciding how best to take her life apart. Low enough that only Lucas could hear him, he said the only words that mattered. "Tomorrow, everyone's masks come off." The waves kept moving against the shore, steady and indifferent to everything that was about to change. Down on the beach, Jennifer lit the last candle and stepped back to admire the table, catching a glimpse of Dai-chan's silhouette against the last of the light, Lucas beside him. She had no way of knowing what had just been confirmed between them. She lifted her hand and waved. After a moment, he waved back. Grace appeared at her elbow with a tray of champagne flutes. "Everything looks beautiful, Miss Jennifer." "It does, doesn't it?" Jennifer said and meant it. Even though beautiful had started to feel like a complicated word to her this week, something that could sit right alongside heartbreak instead of canceling it out. Behind her, the villa's lights flickered on one by one as staff moved through the rooms, and somewhere inside, 5 women were getting dressed for a dinner they believed would end simply. A toast, a flight home, a week filed away as nothing more than a beautiful memory. None of them had any idea that the tide carrying them toward tomorrow had already turned, quietly, irreversibly, the way tides do, long before anyone standing on the shore ever notices the water has begun to pull back. She turned to the table to finish the flowers, humming one final time before everything changed. If you want to see exactly how those masks come off, and what happens the moment Jennifer finds out how far this went, make sure you're subscribed, because part 2 picks up exactly where tonight leaves off, and nothing about this island is going to look the same again.